Hey there, Griff Hamlin here from Blues Guitar Unleashed. Welcome, thanks for joining me here. Today, we're going to talk about some blues chord shapes. This is definitely more of a beginner-leaning lesson. But to me, there are four really important 7th chord shapes. Now, as you probably already know, the blues is primarily dominant 7th chords. So something like A7, D7, E7, anything with a 7 in the name. A little bit of theory side note here. If it says major 7 or minor 7, it is not a dominant 7th. Okay, and sometimes you'll see DOM7, but that is kind of an abbreviation for a dominant 7th family chord. There are basically 3 chord families: major, minor, dominant. So, with all that said, we're going to be looking at traditional, standard. These are the 4 7th chord shapes that you pretty much have to know. So let's jump right in. Now the first one is with the root on the 6th string. Now what's important here, at least to me, is that all of these chord shapes are movable. So what that means is that once I have this shape, knowing what the root note is, I can move it. So here it's an A7, here it's a G7, back to A7, to B7, to C7. I want to have a lot of different options. Okay, so the different chord shapes are going to have different advantages and disadvantages depending on what else is around, as you'll see. So you probably know a regular old traditional bar chord. Okay, now the way I play bar chords, by the way, if you struggle with bar chords, I'll make a suggestion, which is to start with every finger except the root first. Okay, so most people, what they'll do is they'll throw that first finger down and then try to add the other 3. Flip that order. So in other words, put down your 3rd, 4th, and middle finger. So right now, assuming that my root is going to be at the 5th fret of the 6th string on that A, I'm going to first put down my 3rd finger at the 7th fret of the 5th string. I'm going to put my pinky on the 7th fret of the 4th string and my middle finger on the 6th fret of the 3rd string. When I have those 3 notes and they sound good, I'm going to add my first finger onto that low string. Now right now, because I have to kind of lay it down, my top 2 strings just go clunk. But I've got my lowest string, my 5th string, my 4th string, my 3rd string, and then if I go ahead and push a little bit, I can hopefully get all 6 strings. But even if I can't get all 6, at least I get 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe something in there, but at least I get enough to create the illusion of the chord. I have enough notes here that you can tell what chord I'm playing. Okay? Now, in order to turn this into the 7th chord, the dominant 7th chord that we need, we have to lift up the pinky, and that means our index finger that's doing the bar has to push. So it's now pushing on the 5th fret of the 4th string. Now that particular chord shape is fairly challenging for a lot of people, particularly if you're more of a beginner. Even more advanced players can have trouble sometimes just because it does take a fair amount of hand strength to get that to happen. So the good news is that in the real world, you will almost never play that whole chord. Okay, so while right now I want you to, pluck all the notes nice and slow and even, try to make sure that they all ring out. It's good for your technique, it's good to practice, but when we actually get to where we're playing a lot of blues rhythm stuff, we tend to use smaller chords. And I'll talk about that in another video, but for right now, just know that even if this is a struggle, don't be hard on yourself. It's a struggle for everyone. This is one of the more difficult, challenging techniques to get the hang of. And unfortunately, when you're new at it, you're going to have the tendency to push really, really, really hard and try to get those notes to come out. As your technique gets better, as your first finger gets closer to that fret, okay, if you're way back here, it's really hard to push down hard enough. But if you get close to the fret and all your fingers get placed well, it doesn't take nearly as much pressure. Okay, so when you're doing it poorly, it takes a lot more pressure to get the notes to come out. As your technique improves, it takes less pressure. It's kind of a cruel joke, I know. As you get better at it, it requires less of you. But that's just kind of the way it works. So that's our root, like I said, on the 6th string chord. Now, if we go, let's say to a D, to a 5th string root, I have 2 different options. And one of them looks like this. So again, I'm going to start with my 3rd and my 4th finger. So since my root note is on the 5th fret of the 5th string, I'm going to put my 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the 4th string, my pinky on the 7th fret of the 2nd string. Now my 1st finger is going to bar on the 5th fret, and notice that I get all of those notes. Notice that my 6th string doesn't make any sound. That's because my 1st finger is very slightly touching it. Now this is a D7 because that note on the 5th string is D. Now it's a C7, now it's a D7, now it's an E7, now it's an F7, now it's a G7 again. This is a movable chord shape. If I go all the way down to an open, it's an A7, and you might actually know that chord like this. Same chord, just now we're moving the rest of the neck along behind it. Now, with a similar root but kind of facing the other direction is one of my absolute favorites. And this is a movable chord shape because we don't have the top string. I'm not going to strike that top string, and I'm not going to strike the bottom string. And you'll notice that I have my thumb actually reaching around to help me mute out that low E string. It's not necessary, but on this type of chord shape, it's certainly an option. Okay, so I've got my 3rd finger on my root, which is my D, at the 5th fret of the 5th string. I have my middle finger at the 4th fret of the 4th string, just like a C chord. I have my index finger at the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. That much is a C chord, but I've added my pinky to the 5th fret on the 3rd string. If you move that up to an E, you might recognize that sound if you're a Creedence fan. Right, it's a great Beatles, like so many different songs, use that chord shape. It's a great chord shape, one that I see overlooked a little bit too much. So far we have that, which I say is our A7. We have a D7 in 2 different ways. And again, these are movable. Okay, I could do E7. Now the last one that I want to add to your arsenal is one that I don't see nearly enough. And it has a 4th string root. So I have my tiny little, my 1st finger way up here at the 7th fret of the 4th string. I'm gonna do this in A. Now let's do it in G. Now let's do it in A. Okay, so my 3rd finger is on the 9th fret of the 3rd string. My middle finger is at the 8th fret of the 2nd string. My pinky is at the 9th fret of the 1st string. Again, this is movable. So like that's an E7, right? D7, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, B flat. If I just play down the chord, the top 3 strings, you probably recognize that. Right? There's lots of cool things you can do with some of these chord shapes. Okay, so we got 4 chord shapes. So part of what you need to do is, of course, memorize those chord shapes. Very, very important. You have to be able to play them. You have to be able to play them quickly. You need to know the names of your notes on the 6th string, on the 5th string, on the 4th string. Okay, if you don't, that's something that you got to take a little bit of time on. It doesn't have to be a lot of time, it doesn't have to be a lot of work, but it is a very important thing to be able to do. Now to practice these, what I recommend is do something simple, like say a slow blues little jam. Okay, you could use a jam track. I just put a few chords into my looper. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever you want to use. But let me show you how I would play this over a slow blues jam track. So this is a slow blues jam track, and it is 1 and so I'm just using the basic A7 shape. 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Notice I don't play on beat 1, 2, and here comes a D7. So I'll use this shape. 2 and 3 and 4 and now I'll go to this A. 4 and 1 and 2 and now I'm going to go to the grip shape for the E. Now down to the D. Now back to the A. And now to the E. And I can even change in the middle. I could do an A7 way up here. I can go through all of the options that I know. Here's a D. I could do this one. Root on the 6th, root on the 5th string. Back to the A. Up here. I've got an E. I've got a D. I could go to this one. Really, anything is up to you. And as you just sort of, play with them, just sort of play through them, try different options for each of the chords. You can try different keys. Use the key of G, you'll have G, C, and D. Use the key of C, you'll have C, F, and G. Use the key of E, E, A, and B. Key of D would be D, G, and A. That's your 1, 4, 5 in the 5 most common keys that come up, okay? So lots of different options. You can use any of those chords at any time. If the song says play A7 and it doesn't tell you specifically which one to play, they're all fair game. When you're comping, when you're playing in a band and you're just accompanying someone else, we call that comping. Could be somebody singing, could be another soloist, maybe the keyboard player or a saxophone player, or harmonica, another guitar, whatever. You're comping, you're just holding down some chords behind. That's when you have your choice. You can use any of these chords. So when it's the one chord, you play that chord. It doesn't matter how, you get your choice. So you want to have some options, and that's why I think these 4 chord shapes are so important. So get them down, make sure you can do them, and then I'll look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. I'm Griff Hamlin from Blues Guitar Unleashed. As always, I'll leave links near this video for links to the store and all that sort of thing. Sign up for the email list, etc., etc., etc. Hope you get a lot out of this lesson. I hope you dig it, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.